Okay, so we will start. I'm Brother Anthony. I'm sort of President Emeritus is what they say. I don't know. That sounds like the Pope. So welcome to the RAS. I'm sorry that you had to come this way instead of being in Insadong, but it's just things are like that. And we are very glad to welcome Professor Donald Baker. It's been a long time since we saw him last, and his wife. And so Professor Baker studied in the University of Washington, and after being in Korea, he came to Korea in 1971, and he was stationed as a Peace Corps volunteer. He was stationed in Gwangju for 4 or 5 years, and he was teaching in a school in Gwangju. So Gwangju is his second home, though he wasn't here for what happened afterwards. Yeah, well, you'll talk about that. So Professor Baker then moved to UBC in Vancouver, where he set up the Korean Studies section program on the basis of what he had learned. And he's been there ever since. He's published a lot about later Choson intellectual history, the anti-Catholic, the Catholic anti-Catholic conflict, the Confucianism. But he's also recently done a lot of study on what you might call the traumatic events of most recent Korean history, and writing about that. So I'm going to turn this over, Mike. I'm not sure if it's working. I'm turning this over to you, and we'll have some questions afterwards. I think this is the
Is this working?
Usually it's the one that says down. I'm not sure. You might want to experiment.
Okay. Let's see. How do I? While I was setting it up, I'm glad to be back at RAS. The last time I gave a talk here was 11 years ago, and I was talking about a guy named Chung Doo-hwan, who died in 1836. I just published a book about him, How to Be Moral, by the way. Wait for 2 years. It'll be open access in 2 years. You won't have to pay a thing for it. Okay. So it's good to be back. And there we go. And I'll be talking about Gwangju 43 years ago. And I was reminded that this is still a very hot topic. 2 Saturdays ago, I walked down Gwanghwamun and I saw demonstrators claiming that there were 600 North Korean agents in Gwangju in 1980, and that people of Gwangju weren't demonstrating at all. It was all these North Koreans. Well, I actually was there near the tail end for a couple of days. I did not hear any North Korean accents. And none of the bodies that were recovered were found to be from North Koreans. So I think we can dismiss that. But it's very important how Gwangju is remembered. This is actually from a museum that's been established in the site of the old detention center in Gwangju, where demonstrators were taken and beaten and tortured. It is now across the street from the Kim Dae-jung Convention Center, which is somewhat ironic. I'm going to talk about religious activists during those, what I call the 10 terrible days from May 18th to May 27th, 1980. I've been working through some oral histories compiled by the May 18 Foundation in Gwangju. And I've only gone through the volumes on the Catholics, women's group called Songpekwe, and Catholic Farmers Association. So, but research is not complete, but I think I have enough to share with you tonight. And I want to talk about how the Catholic clergy in Korea became radicalized. Okay? Because it used to be a very conservative group, actually. They were hiding because of over a century of persecution. Back in 1974, Bishop in Wonju, he spells his name, TJI, Bishop Ji Hak-sun, was arrested for supporting some student activists. He just returned from Rome when he was arrested, by the way, and put in jail for a couple of months. That led to some radical priests forming what they call the National Association of Catholic Priests for the Realization of Justice. There's an official church group of each diocese, the Commission for Peace and Justice, but this priest group is more radical. Okay. And then, of course, 1976, famous March 1st declaration against Park Chung-hee's dictatorship. For some reason, they chose to meet at Myeongdong Cathedral, even though it was not all Catholic. Only a minority of the speakers were Catholic. But some of those there from some people tried to go from Gwangju. You'll hear their names again in my talk. Father Joe Pius, Kim Sung-young, Francesco, and Father Chun Doo-hwan were stopped by the police from attending that meeting at Myeongdong Cathedral. The Catholic farmers movement, what's interesting is there's both a Catholic farmers movement and a Protestant farmers movement, but the Catholic farmers movement was much more active. I suspect that's because the urban workers movement was much more active among the Protestants than the Catholics, because the Catholics had kind of been based in the countryside. That's what they were when they were being persecuted in the 19th century, and they kind of stayed there. While when the Protestant missionaries arrived in the 1880s, they established themselves in the city in Seoul, right? And they built schools and hospitals and so on. So you have this kind of distinction between Catholics working with farmers and Protestants working with workers. Although they both did both, but and this Catholic farmers movement was galvanized by what's called the sweet potato, Gogoma incident. What happened was that the government encouraged people to plant sweet potatoes. It said, we'll buy them back at a set price. So people did that. And then the government brought back only about 30% of them. And so the farmers were pretty angry. They lost money, right? And they protested. And how do they protest? They go to the local Catholic church and protest. And then there was an incident over in Andong, not known for being a radical hotbed, where a local Catholic farmer who had been active in protesting a similar incident where the government had told people to plant potatoes, and the potatoes, they gave them the seeds and the potatoes didn't sprout. So they lost the crop. He protested, and he was kidnapped by what was then called the KCIA and was held for like 2 weeks. And he was released and told not to tell anybody he'd been kidnapped, but of course he did immediately. He went to his Catholic priest and the story was publicized. He was arrested. The priest who told the story was arrested and so on. So the Catholic Church was being radicalized before 1980. And again, when farmers from the various rural areas in Jeollanam-do wanted to get together and discuss problems that cross county boundaries, they would go to the Catholic churches in Gwangju. Usually they were held where Father Jo Pyo was the pastor, or Father Kim Sung-young, and Jung Yu-hwan. The YWCA, we don't think of them as a radical organization, right? Okay. The YWCA, both the YMCA and the YWCA had buildings close to the center of Gwangju. But for some reason, the YWCA was much more progressive oriented. And it provided space for some groups, political active groups that were not necessarily Protestant groups. Now, the YWCA was associated with the more progressive wing of the Korean progressive movement, usually called Kijang after the name of one of the bigger members. The Yejong pastors controlled the YMCA, which may be why it was more conservative. And they had a pastor that really helped them a lot, advised a lot of the people at the YWCA who managed to escape arrest for a while after Gwangju went into hiding. But so this group is a member of the National Council of Churches in Korea. And they ran a credit union, which YWCA ran. Also, they had a space for a group called the Good Books Reading Group. Good book doesn't mean the Bible. It means politically progressive books, like books on the political economy is what it meant. Books that the Korean government under Park Chung-hee in the 70s did not want people reading. And they began meeting in 1978. And they would invite occasional speakers like Ham Suk-hun and others, Paek Nak-jung, others down from Seoul to speak to their group about political issues. And they were meeting at the YWCA. The other activist groups in Gwangju, in 1977, Noktu bookstore opened. You might know what Noktu refers to? Right, exactly. It's the nickname for the general who led the Donghak armies. Yeah, so radical, right? From north of Gwangju. So, that was kind of a gathering place for radicals in late 1970s. Also, a bunch of radicals established a night school for the workers in the industrial complex in Gwangju. They met at first in the basement of a Catholic church, but it wasn't a Catholic group. Among the people who taught there, Yun Sang-wan, who later became the spokesperson for the citizen militia, who was killed on the morning of May 27. Park Ki-sun. Why is she important? Anybody know the song "Nimmo Wihan Hengjangok," March of the Beloved? Yeah, it was composed in 1982 for their spirit wedding, because she died before 1980 of actually yuntan poisoning. She had been dropped out of school to work in a factory. And because he was killed in 1980, and both of them were single when they died, so he had a spirit wedding. That song was composed to them. Okay. The third name there, Park Kwang-hyun, had just been elected before 1980, just been elected head of the student body at Chun Doo-hwan University. A very powerful speaker. I never heard him speak. I'm told he's quite powerful. He went into hiding, was finally caught about a year later, and ended up going on a hunger strike that cost him his life in 1982. Okay. Okay. And then a group that I didn't know much about, because people don't talk about the women in Gwangju in May 1980, but a group called Songbekwe. And they began meeting in 1978. Many of them were the wives of political prisoners. And the first thing they did was knit socks for the political prisoners because it's cold in those prisons, and then provide food for them. Okay. And they actually decided to form a society. And they went to one of these Catholic Farmers Association meetings at a Catholic church and said, why don't we form a group? And they did, and met at the YWCA. Okay. Most of them are Protestants, not all. Okay. Here they are. Okay. Oops, let me go back to it. Yeah. I mean, most of them are women in their 20s. Some of them a little bit older. One of the leaders was the wife of Hwang Suk-young, the famous writer. His wife's one of the leaders. Mm-hmm. One of the women later became a Protestant pastor, and a woman in Cholapukto. Mm-hmm. Interesting group. Again, people didn't talk about them very little scholarship. I've been collecting materials about the Gwangju massacre, as I call it, since 1980, basically. And I didn't even know about this group until the last few years. There's not maybe 2 or 3 scholarly articles, and then the May 18th Foundation has published a collection of interviews with them. We're beginning to see some ecumenical activism. In February 1980, okay, Catholic and Protestant activists got together and formed a group they called the Sangwei Sungyo Hifihui, which literally means this Association for what? Proselytizing to society. That's not what it was. It wasn't about proselytizing, because the Catholics and Protestants together. It was about working with poorly paid workers and impoverished farmers. That's what it was all about. Catholics and Protestants working together. Mm-hmm. So we already had some politically active small communities within both the Catholic and the Protestant communities in Gwangju before May 1980. Okay. And the leaders of this group, Joe Ara, who was head of the YWCA, okay, and Father Kim Sung-yong, who was the pastor at Namdong Church, which you'll hear about again, which church what used to be the Dochung. Gwangju is no longer the provincial capital, so it used to be the provincial capital building. Behind the provincial capital building, not far, was the Namdong Church. Okay, and in this group, there are actually more Protestant members than Catholic members. Okay, and we're going to talk later about this, what's called the settlement committee that arose to try to resolve the situation in Gwangju. And there were several settlement committees. The more radical settlement committee members came out of this group. Mm-hmm. Jo Alan, Kim Sung-yong, and others. Mm-hmm. What's the religious landscape like in Gwangju? Very different from what it is now. Okay. There were only 14 Catholic churches in Gwangju, 800,000 people. 14 Catholic churches, of which only 9 had Korean pastors. The rest had foreign missionary pastors, Irish Columban fathers. There were 117 Protestant churches in Gwangju. Okay. Which is why, see, I'm an historian. I get puzzled. Why were more Catholic priests arrested than Protestant pastors? And there are a lot more Protestant pastors around there. That's what I wanted to find out. In Gwangju, Catholics were about 3% of the population of Gwangju. There are like 24,000 Catholics in the whole city. Only about 85,000 in the whole province. That's harder to get figures for the total number of Protestants because it's not a centralized organization, right? But we can figure it's probably 5 to 10 times as many Protestants as Catholics back then in Choladong, with 2,500 pastors spread across the province. Mm-hmm. This is before May 18th. You know that because the soldiers are outside the gates. This is the floodgate of Chun University. And these are regular troops. These are not paratroopers. And they're just trying to stop the students from leaving the campus. Those who know what happened on May 18th at 10 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning, know this is where it began. The soldiers were inside the campus. They'd already begun arresting people the night before on campus. And 200 or 300 students showed up. They'd promised themselves they would show up if General Chun Doo-hwan declared martial law, which he did on the evening of May 17th. And they showed up and they began shouting, "Give us democracy, give rid of martial law." And they expected, until that time, when you demonstrated, you were hit with tear gas. They expected tear gas. They thought it was riot control police. It was paratroopers. They were clubbed. I don't mean sticked, I mean clubbed. Mm-hmm. And they started running downtown and yelling, "They're killing us." And people didn't believe them. So they saw the troops chasing them. Mm-hmm. So the terror begins on May 18th, from the gates of Chun University to downtown. If you know Gwangju back then, Kumnam-no and Chungdang-no is next to Kumnam-no, they're parallel, the main streets. Chungdang-no was like the place on Sunday, no traffic. The young boys and girls, young men and women would put on their Sunday best clothes, walk up and down the street trying to attract members of the opposite sex. And then suddenly you see these people running and the soldiers chasing them. They're not shooting yet. The soldiers didn't start shooting until the next day. But clubs can kill. Mm-hmm. But Bishop Yun, who's the Bishop Yun Kong-hee, was the Bishop of Gwangju at the time, Archbishop actually. He didn't see any violence that day. The priests are all busy with mass and stuff, right? They're busy. Father Joe and Father Jung didn't see much, they say, that day. They found out about it that night. Like Father Joe had gone out to visit some people in the countryside. Coming back, he heard when he got back to his rectory what was going on, but he hadn't seen anything. Joe Otto, on the other hand, did see young men being beaten on the streets. I mean, it's almost random. It didn't have to be a demonstrator. The soldiers thought any young man was a demonstrator, and therefore, was, by their definition, a communist. Mm-hmm. She saw the people being beaten at the bus terminal. And Hong Seok-yeon's wife saw small-scale battles between demonstrators on Kumnam-no. What would happen? Young people, mostly young men at this point, would grab some rocks, throw them at the soldiers, and run away. Right, and the soldiers would chase them with their clubs. They're not shooting yet on the 18th. Mm-hmm. It gets worse on the 19th. Archbishop Yun, the old Catholic Center, which is now the archives for the May 18th democratization movement, it's a 6th-floor building. And Archbishop Yun had an office on the 6th floor. He actually saw soldiers clubbing people on the street below, and clubbing them, people pushed to the ground with their head broken open, bleeding. Yeah. Right? He talks about how guilty he felt. He couldn't go down and stop it. But he did leave Gwangju that afternoon to go to Seoul to tell Cardinal Kim up in Seoul what he saw that day. Mm-hmm. There was supposed to be a meeting the night of the May 19th at Father Jung's church, but the police blocked it. By the way, Father Joe B.O. so mad at the police, he pushed past one. And the guy said, "How can a priest be so brutal?" When he was starting to get in there. On his way back from that failed meeting, Father Kim Song-young did see soldiers with bayonets drawn for the first time. Mm-hmm. And Father Joe saw, and not a lot of people saw this kind of thing, soldiers stopping buses, city buses, and dragging the young men off the bus to beat them up and club them. They're just riding on buses. You know? More violence than me. Okay. Around noon, paratroopers went into the YWCA to rough up the people running the credit union for some reason. Across the street, there's a study hall, a Koshiwan, about 4-story tall. And the students in there saw what was going on and started yelling at the paratroopers. Not a smart thing to do. Paratroopers turned around, went into that building, dragged the students down the stairs, got them down on the street, clubbed them, and then threw them unconscious, hopefully not dead, into the back of a military pickup truck, basically, and drove them away. That really radicalized the YWCA, seeing that right in front of them. Okay. And this surprised me particularly. A woman named Jun Han-ae, one of the members of the Song Gong-hui, she says on the 19th, maybe later, actually, most people don't think it was this early, she started making Molotov cocktails. This is YWCA woman, because she wanted the demonstrators to be able to defend themselves. And so she made them in the back room in the Nokdu, the Nokdu bookstore. Later, they moved to the YWCA to make their Molotov cocktails in the YWCA. It was an unfair fight. These are unarmed young men until the 21st, anyway. Rocks are nothing against clubs and bayonets, and then also guns with bullets. They started shooting on the 19th. As you can see there, and even after they're arrested, and they're still being hit, clubbed, and the brutality was unbelievable. I should point out, I don't blame the soldiers so much as I blame their commanders. Soldiers were lied to. They were told there were North Korean agents there, and they believed it. The commanders knew that was a lie. These are special forces troops who are trained to fight behind enemy lines. They thought they were really fighting North Korean agents. This is what Gwangju looked like during the 18th to the 21st. It's an occupied city. This is the main street of downtown. There was a very confusing episode of the Catholic Center. Again, this is very close to the Docheon-do Provincial Capitol building. Demonstrators looked up on the roof and thought they saw paratroopers on the roof. So they wanted to get them. So they ran upstairs, discovered what was going on. CBS, Christian Broadcasting Company, was broadcasting from there, and they had a couple of local soldiers, not paratroopers, protecting them. Okay. So the students, sorry. By that time, the paratroopers had learned what the students had done, and they went running in after them. And they busted up a lot of the windows there and doors inside the Catholic Center. I've been to the Catholic Center since then, and I don't know when this happened. If you go to the 6th floor, you'll see Bishop Yun's old kind of apartment. There are bullet holes in the wall. Okay. Oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. Maybe it says, okay, here we go, May 20th. That was May 19th. Archbishop Yun returned to Gwangju. Cardinal Kim was able to meet with Chun Doo-hwan briefly, but Chun Doo-hwan said, I can't talk to you now. I'm busy suppressing a riot in Gwangju. That's what he called it. The number of demonstrators is growing. As people are seeing young people, not even people who are demonstrating, young people being clubbed into unconsciousness on the street, they get angry. And they began throwing the Molotov cocktails now, along with rocks at the soldiers. I wasn't going to tell this story, but I will. I thought it was a rumor when I heard it in 1980. Just found out a few months ago it wasn't a rumor. I read an eyewitness account. There was a high school teacher who happened to live near the front gates of Cheonnam University. And he heard some of the noise from demonstrations and went out to see what was going on. He had a 3-year-old son at home. His wife was 8 months pregnant. He didn't come back for a while. So she went out to look for him. When he did come back, he found her body on the street. Her face was almost unrecognizable. Blown away by him, 16. 8 months pregnant. I'm assuming the soldier didn't look at her. He just felt somebody move and shot. Okay. Father Jung, by the way, allowed some exhausted soldiers, not paratroopers, regular troops, because regular troops were trying to mitigate what the paratroopers were doing. Okay. He allowed some paratroopers, some regular troops to take a break in the garden of his church. This is how violent it was. There's a couple of the foreign reporters there taking pictures of the body being dragged to the street. And then May 25th. Cardinal Kim was able to talk to the U.S. ambassador then, as well as the martial law commanders, and they assured him they would try to get the violence to stop. Of course, they didn't. I met Ambassador Gleistein 20 years after this. We had a meeting at University of Southern California on the 20th anniversary of the Gwangju Uprising. And he kept saying, you know, people in Korea weren't ready for democracy in 1980. I said, Mr. Ambassador, they died for democracy. They were ready. He was a decent guy, didn't understand Korea. Then about 50,000 unarmed Gwangju citizens marched downtown, and in front of the provincial Capitol building is a rotary. I'll show you a photo of it in a minute. The soldiers had made the provincial Capitol building their headquarters. So 50,000 unarmed people filled the street facing the soldiers. Okay. Around noon, 8 of the Korean Catholic priests decided that violence had to stop. They were going to put on their priestly vestments, walk downtown, and stand between the troops and the people. But one of them called the chaplain for the troops, and the chaplain checked with the general and said, we can't guarantee your safety. They were still trying to decide what to do when they heard the bullets from helicopters. Father Joe was the one who heard the bullets first, and later he was accused of libel by saying the army shot from helicopters. They did. We found the bullets later in the 10th floor of the Chun Doo-hwan building. I should point out, it wasn't gunships. They had helicopters with the guy hanging out of the window of the door of the helicopter with the rifle, automatic weapon shooting. That finally got the people in Gwangju really angry. So the young men broke into reserve army arsenals and began grabbing weapons. And pretty soon there were 5,000 weapons in the hands of most of the young men in Gwangju. Remember, most young men have military training. Right? The army retreated. They left town. They retreated to the outskirts of town. By the way, I didn't put this on the slide. Behind the provincial Capitol building was still there, the Chun-Nam University Hospital. As the troops were leaving, they shot into the hospital. Why? Bullets went into the operating room. How do I know this? Doctors who were in the operating room talked about it. Oops, let me show you the helicopters again. Oops. Okay. I can't show them shooting, but there they are, helicopters flying above the city. I didn't see them shooting, but I saw people like helicopters fly ahead if I do like this. You know. The troops are gone. Gwangju becomes a self-governing city. Okay. The women at the YWCA, they begin helping organize rallies of Gwangju citizens around that fountain in front of the old provincial Capitol building. And they begin making black ribbons for people to wear for mourning, and begin fighting food. The stories in the press up in Seoul at that time were that Gwangju was chaos. It wasn't chaos. It was very well organized, actually. The armed young men called themselves the citizens' militia. Some elder leading citizens of Gwangju tried to organize a settlement committee to try to negotiate between the military and the citizens militia, basically, and the people, because they knew that the army would eventually come back, and they knew it'd be an uneven contest; it'd be slaughter. Okay. They first asked Archbishop Yun to head the committee. Again, there's very few Catholics in Gwangju. Why they asked him, I don't know. He said, no, thank you. He said he recommended Father Joe Bio to do it. Okay. There are also 3 Protestant pastors on that committee. Here's one of those. Let me go back. Oops. Go back. That's what it looked like, but this is not my photo. I got it from the web. They're gathered around the fountain. I lived right around the corner from there back in the early 70s, so I know this area quite well. And again, they're a peaceful group. People are giving speeches, some more radical than others, talking about the need to resist the military and to make the military apologize what they're doing to the people. The first settlement committee tried to convince the young men, the citizens militia, to turn in their guns with getting nothing in return. They said, no way. Right? They were angry. Now, the first Citizens Committee was more realistic. They knew the army was going to be able to come in anytime they wanted in full force. But people in Gwangju were pretty angry. They weren't ready to give up their guns. Right? And so they lost the confidence of the people of Gwangju. A more radical group began to meet at Namdong Church, Father Kim Song-yong's church. They included Father Kim, of course, Father Joe, Joe Ara from the YWCA, E. Shin, who was the general manager of the YWCA, a man named Isang Hak, a Protestant elder, and 11 others. They wanted the military to allow the police to come in and restore order rather than the military coming in. People trusted the police. And that group by May 24th had replaced the original settlement committee because, again, the original settlement committee lost all the confidence of the people. Meanwhile, more radical groups were organizing at the Noktu bookstore, remember that? And at the Double Night School. But then they moved to the YWCA that was closer to downtown. So these radical groups that are associated with the Citizens Militia are working out of the YWCA partially, and partly out of the Venture Capital building, which they've now captured. The YWCA began publishing the Fighters Bulletin, which was a little newsletter of what was going on for the people of Gwangju. And they provided food to the Citizens Militia and so on. I want to show you the pictures of the priests. This is a picture of the settlement committee here. On my right, your left. That's Father Kim Song-yong, and then Father Kim there, and then Father Joe over here. Does Father Kim look a little Western? We'll get that story later. It doesn't look like a Westerner. Here's the church. It's now called the 518 Church in formerly in Gwangju, the Namdong Church. There was continued resistance. Father Joe and actually Father Nam Jae-hee, another priest from Gwangju, they joined together with a conservative pastor to try to get the Citizens Militia group to turn the guns over to them, and then they would negotiate with the military. They got 4,500 of the 5,000 guns. They got most of them. Okay. And so they did pretty good. Father Joe actually worked most of the night because right when the army retreated, you had little groups of citizen militia scattered at various places on the outskirts of the city, kind of facing the army, you know. So they would go to these guys and say, "Give us your weapon." What? You know? But they have single shot weapons. The army has automatic weapons. No contest. Father Kim claims he heard members of the old settlement committee asking the army to come into the city quickly to restore order. That made him pretty angry, as you can imagine. And so the new settlement committee, again, they're called the Namdong Church Group. They demanded the government apologize for its excessive force. And they took over the old settlement committee offices in the provincial capital. This is controversial. On one of the rallies on May 25th, people say they heard Father Joe say, "If I had a gun, I would shoot those soldiers myself." He denies he ever said that. But Father Kim said, "I heard you." So that was brought up and he was being interrogated and tortured later. I have to admit, I'm a pacifist. If somebody gave me a gun, then I don't know what I would have done either. I wouldn't be able to shoot it. I wouldn't know what to do. But Archbishop Yun left for Seoul again to try to get the higher ups to intervene. And the settlement committee was worried there was dynamite stored in the provincial capital building in the basement. They managed to find some young men with military experience to get rid of the detonators and the dynamite. They were afraid it would explode and the whole city would go up, right? They were worried about that. Remember, these guys are trying to resolve things peacefully. They had 4 demands. The new settlement committee, the government must first acknowledge its responsibility. Don't say it was North Korean. Don't say the citizens of Gwangju started it. Admit, people in Gwangju didn't start shooting back until the 3rd day of the violence. The government must pay compensation for the lives lost and for property damage. They must apologize formally. And the government must not take any retaliatory measures. And Joe Ara did tell the activists, you can use the YWCA, but don't get the building damaged. Okay. Well, that didn't work out very well. May 26th. The young men in the provincial capital building, the citizen militia group, split into 2 groups. There was one group who said, we're going to fight till the end. Another group said, we're not going to win. We're going to leave. I didn't put this on the slides, but friend of mine who was a reporter then, or was it Washington Review, Norman Thorpe, interviewed Chun Doo-hwan, the spokesperson of the citizen militia, on the afternoon of May 26th. And he said to Yun's the leader of this hardline group that said, we'll fight to the end. He said to Yun, the army's ready to attack. And Yun says, I know that. Norman Thorpe spoke Korean, by the way. He could speak to Yun. And he said, the army's going to kill you. And Yun said, I know that. And Norman said, you know, you can sneak out the back way and live. And Yun said, if I'm not willing to die for democracy, the rest of Korea won't know how dedicated I was to democracy. Norman Thorpe found his body the next day. Group led by Father Kim and another Protestant pastor formed a group of about 10 members of the New Settlement Committee who did what they called a death-defying march. The army was beginning, it was very clear the army was going to move into Gwangju soon on the afternoon of the 26th. They marched to the front lines, facing tanks, and demanded to talk to their commanders. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. They were able to talk to the commanders who said, I'm following orders from higher up, sorry. You tell your people to give up their guns by midnight or it's over for them. The attempt at mediation failed. Father Kim then left for Seoul. And I mentioned he looked like a Westerner. What he did, he was able to borrow a car from an Irish missionary priest. And then he had a driver, and he acted like he couldn't speak Korean. He was able to get through the roadblocks and get to Seoul because he looked kind of Western. Okay, but he was not in Gwangju on the 27th. On May 27th, starting at 3:30 in the morning, resistance crushed. There was a sound truck going through the city saying, people of Gwangju, come downtown and save the students. But it was drowned out by two things. There's kind of a helicopter overhead saying anybody on the street would be shot. Also by the sound of tanks rolling into Gwangju. 20,000 troops invaded in the morning, May 27th. And now the women in the provincial capital building had been told to leave. The men were going to fight to the death. The women were told to leave. Same thing in the YWCA. Two of the women stayed until like 4 in the morning. Once the troops entered the city, they fled out the back wall. Okay? They went to the Noktu bookstore to hide. Resistors were killed definitely at the provincial capital building. I got to Gwangju, I have to tell you, on the 27th. I didn't understand why there was fresh blood in front of the YWCA. I didn't know people would be killed there. We don't know what happened in Gwangju Park across the river. Missionaries tell me they heard gunshots the morning of May 27th. We didn't find any bodies there. So I don't know. Two members of Somekwe and the women were arrested at 7 a.m. in the morning. Arrested and fled. Here's the arrest of them, those who survived being arrested. And here's the aftermath. On your left, my right, is, I think it's Sangmugwan. Sangmugwan was a judo studio across the road from the provincial capital building. That's where they would bring bodies to be identified. When I got to Gwangju, there was a long line of grandmothers dressed all in white, waiting to go inside and see if their grandchildren's bodies were inside. On your right, my left, is the official cemetery now, which of course we weren't allowed to have an official cemetery for a long time because the government didn't want us to mourn the dead as victims of Gwangju, but finally we were allowed. Mangwaldo Cemetery. It's very moving, although I have to say when I go there, I don't like the statues they have there. They have these statues of these young, brave men fighting for freedom. I thought people scared to death. You know, and maybe people did look like that, but I didn't see that. So the arrest. See, what puzzled me, within 6 weeks after May 27th, 8 of the Catholic priests in Gwangju were arrested. There were only 9 Korean Catholic priests, plus the bishop. 8 were arrested. Father Joe was sentenced to 3 years in jail, but it's typical in Korea. He was released pretty soon. Father Kim was sentenced to 15 years in jail, but he was released after 14 months. Problem with Father Kim, when he was in Seoul, he wrote a thing called More Out of Sorrow Than Anger. And it was translated into first Japanese and then English and spread overseas. And the government was really upset about that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. On June 12, 1980, 5 priests in Seoul and 1 nun were arrested for getting information out of Korea. They would send it to the Japanese Catholic Council for Peace and Justice, where it'd be translated in English and go to North America. The nun, for some reason, was beaten so badly, much more than the priests were, that she was physically incapacitated the rest of her life, can hardly speak and can't walk. This is what they did to her. Sister Mariana. Yeah, Mariana, young Mariana. There was one Catholic priest in Cholobucto, by the way, who also beaten, but not that bad, but he was beaten for giving a sermon about Gwangju in June 1980. What about Song Pak-Wei? In addition to the 2 women arrested on May 27th, 1 member was arrested later that summer, and 2 more went into hiding. They were able to escape. Joe Ara and Ye Shin from the YWCA, the director and the general manager, were arrested. Joe was sentenced to 3 years in jail. But again, she was out within 6 months. And Ye Shin was given a deferment of jail time. And what do they do? What do they do? But when Joe returned to the YWCA, she fired 2 members of the Song Pak-Wei who had been working for her. Said they were responsible for the damage they happened to the building because they did too much, support for the citizen militia there, and let young men station themselves there on the morning of May 27th. So she fired them. This is an interesting story. In March 1981, there was a guy named Yun-Han Bong, well-known activist in the 70s, who went underground on May 17th. But the government was looking for him. And so we had to escape from Korea. Now, we had checked both the West German, it was West Germany then, right? West German and Canadian embassies said that if we could get a refugee from Gwangju to within their border, they could get refuge, but they wouldn't help us get them out. Okay. 2 women from Song Pak-Wei managed to smuggle Yun-Han Bong down to Busan, the port, put him on a freighter to Bellingham, Washington, near Vancouver. I didn't know about this last part of it until recently. Turns out he arrived there and he spent 2 weeks at the home of a friend of mine in Seattle who didn't tell me about it because he couldn't at the time because Yun-Han Bong was an illegal immigrant. And then Senator Ted Kennedy managed to get him refugee status, the only Gwangju refugee, legal refugee in the U.S. Yun-Han Bong. But that made the president of the group, Song Pak-Wei, known, and the group dissolved. Okay? It was too dangerous to be a member of it anymore. After 1980, activism doesn't stop. In December 1980, members of the Catholic Farmers Movement joined with students from Chun Doo-hwan National University to firebomb the U.S. Culture Center. I used to hang out there when I was in Peace Corps. Wasn't that far from my home. No one was injured and the building wasn't severely damaged. By the way, 2 different directors of the U.S. Culture Center in Gwangju resigned in the early 1980s over protests that the U.S. government was asking them to have people, asking them to call the local Korean police to arrest demonstrators in the center. More serious incident, March 1982, 2 Protestant seminarians from a very conservative Protestant group, the Koreapa, the one that had the Korea Seminary. They firebombed the U.S. Cultural Center, not knowing somebody was inside, and he died. So where do they go to hide? A Catholic priest home. And he negotiated with the government that they would turn themselves in with guarantee they wouldn't be sentenced to death. Well, guess what? They were. They weren't executed, they were released, and they arrested the priest too. Okay. If you go to the May 18th cemetery, there are 129 Protestants buried there, about 200 and something people buried there, I think. 129 Protestants, only 38 Catholics, and only 23 Buddhists, and a few Buddhists. Well, what's interesting, in 1990, the press was able to get the government to admit it had been secretly spying on people throughout Korea. And among the people they were spying on, there were over 1,300 names on the list. 177 were religious leaders. But of those, 119 were Catholics, of whom 65 were clergy. For some reason, the government was really afraid of Catholics. Okay? Around 2/3 of the religious leaders investigated were Catholic. Now, what is the reason for that? I suspect it's because of the global organizational strength of the Catholic Church. The Catholics in Korea could get information out to Tokyo, which would get over to the US and get to Europe. Organization, right? The Protestants are too disorganized. Okay. So why did they arrest Song Baek-hoi? Because they supported the citizens militia. They supplied Molotov cocktails. They helped print the fighters' bulletin. They provided food. These two groups. So that's. I maybe went too fast there, but
Questions?
yeah, we have questions. Yeah, I'm a Joseon Dynasty historian. It's taken me 43 years to do work on this. As an academic, I have to be objective. Very hard to be objective about this. I'm trying now, because when I left Gwangju in 1980, grandmother types grabbed my arm and said, "Tell the world what happened to us." And I've been trying to do it ever since. My students know. But I'm past retirement age. I mean, I'm still working. I hope to either do an article or two, maybe a book on the experiences of people in Gwangju in 1980 and how they survived those 10 days of terror, what I call it. I'll never forget what I saw there. Changed my life. But, any questions?
Among the Catholics, how many were arrested? How many were married? And how many were convicted?
At that time, no foreign priests were arrested. At that time, I mean, Father James Sennett had been expelled earlier, but no, they stayed away from the foreigners were protected. I didn't know that when I went there, but we were. At one point, a soldier almost shoved a bayonet in my gut, and then he saw I was a foreigner and said, "Sorry." And they didn't touch the Archbishop either. So, there's a collection of first-person accounts by the priest in Gwangju, May 1980, and one is an Irish priest. He was never arrested. His chapter is called "I Too Am a Gwangju Person." So they were really afraid of foreign reactions. And of course, when I got back from Gwangju, I was a Fulbright scholar then, so I had a semi-diplomatic passport. I met with a top official at the U.S. Embassy here in Seoul. He was angry at me for going down there. He said, "If something happened to you, that would have been bad for U.S.-Korean relations." I said, "I don't give a damn. I had to see if my family was okay, the family I lived with." But that was their attitude, you know. And the Koreans were aware of that too, so foreigners were pretty much safe. We didn't know that at the time we were there, but we were safe. But again, later on, people were married, got in trouble later. Other question?
Yeah, I guess the follow-up question. I went down to the Gwangju Lovely Brothers. And one of the priests there actually had been Gwangju during that time.
Okay, yeah.
And he said he couldn't really specifically prove it, but he really had strong inclination to believe that Kim Dae-jung had some prior knowledge that something was afoot, but it really been supported in one way or another. The people were really willing to confront the authorities.
I've seen no evidence of that. And Kim Dae-jung himself has said that when he got out of prison, because he was arrested on May 17th, he was shocked to find out what had happened in Gwangju. He didn't hear about it when he was in prison. And I met him in 83, and he still was shocked by what had happened in 1980. But I think it's possible, but I saw no evidence of that. I mean, the people, it started off with like 200 or 300 demonstrators demonstrating peacefully. It only grew because of the Army's treatment of those people. You know, if the Army had treated those people with tear gas, it wouldn't have exploded the way it did. You know?
I know one of the caretakers. He's actually a policeman now, but I mean, at the time, as a young man, he was in the military.
Yeah.
And he was going to put troops placed
in
front of the demonstrators. And he said they had no idea what they were walking into.
Right.
They thought it was going to be kind of a peaceful demonstration by the citizens. And for that reason, while they carried carbine, there was absolutely no ammunition with them at the time.
On the 18th, there wasn't, right?
And so when the citizens start grappling with the soldiers and realized that the soldiers had nothing to fire with, then they grabbed the guns, and then all chaos broke out. In his opinion, if they had ammunition or gun, and if someone had shot and injured or possibly killed someone, maybe that would have scared the bejesus out of the civilians to not keep confronting and nip things in the bud as far as the violence.
Not what I've heard. They weren't shooting at people at 18, they were clubbing people into unconsciousness. The first man killed was clubbed to death. He was a deaf man who on May 19th had gone to the bus station to say goodbye to his brother, or was walking back home and didn't hear the command to stop and was beaten to death. Now, I should mention on May 21st, when the Army first fired into the large crowd, they fired blanks. People ran away. They said, oh, it's blanks. They came back. But another thing to note, there were 50,000 people there, right? Only about 70 or 80 were killed and about 300 something wounded. That means most of the soldiers must have been shooting above their heads. Otherwise, there would have been a lot more people killed. So.
Question on the screen
from
Jacko.
Yeah. I agree. If there was even one North Korean agent there, if the government had found the body, they would have let us know.
Brian Myers last week was saying at this time in Korea and South Korea, there were hundreds of North Korean infiltrated agents, but those who were in Gwangju were never involved in anything because that was not their role.
Well, that's interesting because the U.S. government intercepted North Korean communication, which North Koreans were very surprised what was going on in Gwangju. They were trying to send people down there, but couldn't get them down there in time.
Nothing to do with
nothing to do with it.
The agents were on, they're totally different.
Yeah, I never heard of that hundreds. What evidence does he have for hundreds of agents in North?
There were lots of infiltrations.
Yeah, but they usually were caught. Not always. That's true, but yeah.
Indirect agents.
Yeah. So there's 7,000 probably. Yeah. Well, they had more leftist groups in South Korea in the 1980s than they did in the 70s, I think. Yeah. Got a question?
While the Catholic clergy was radicalized, did that extend to the lay people? I know in similar times in South America, a similar situation happened where the Catholic clergy were radicalized, and that then spread to the ecclesiastical-based communities. Was that similar in Korea?
There are obviously radical lay Catholics. The Catholic Farmers Association is a lay organization, and they were quite radical. But there was a real split in the Catholic Church. There were the Cardinal Kim had to balance between the radicals and the conservatives. Taegu was very conservative. In fact, 2 priests in Taegu ended up serving in the Chun Doo-hwan government. And so there was a split. But I would say in Gwangju, the radical priests were supported by their parishioners. But again, other parts of Korea were not the same.
With the religious leaders who were arrested, do you know what their experiences in prison were like compared to non-religious prisoners? Were they treated differently?
Some were tortured, some were not. Father Kim says he was not tortured, but he could hear people being tortured. And Father Joe was a little bit, but not as bad as some others. And so my impression is, again, that if you were a young man arrested, it was assumed that you were a communist and you were going to be treated bad. Now, why the nun was treated so badly in Seoul, I don't know. Maybe they didn't like the fact that a woman was talking back to them. I don't know. But again, it also often depends on the individual doing the interrogation. Jo Ara says after her trial, the judge apologized and says, I'm a Christian. I go to a Protestant church. I'm really sorry about this, but I had to do this. I had to sentence you. Got a question way in the back there.
Catholics were spread in the countryside.
Right.
So I would assume it was all over for all of the country, not just Gwangju and Seoul province, right?
Catholic farmers are all over. Yeah, yeah.
And the radicalization of the people here,
Right. Yeah.
Must have happened all over the country at the same time, more or less.
Yeah.
Then why is it that it was specifically in Pyongyang or Gwangju that had a bit of hit? And when the soldiers were told that you are after North Koreans,
right?
If that's their narrative, is it just out of thin air, or is it? I mean, so why the center of all this stuff in Congress supposed to end up?
We don't know the exact thinking of Chun Doo-hwan and No Tae-yu, but Gwangju was the home base of Kim Dae-jung. And there were already paratroopers stationed in Gwangju on May 17th. They began arresting students on campus in the evening of May 17th. Now, Gwangju was the only place where people showed up on May 18th to demonstrate. In the rest of the country, student leaders have been arrested on the 17th. I don't know whether the government deliberately left them unarrested in Gwangju because they wanted to have an excuse, or whether they were just lucky in Gwangju. But the government definitely wanted Gwangju because it was they were already blaming Kim Dae-jung, right? And also, Gwangju was becoming radicalized before that because the economic development of Korea was all Gyeongsangdo, right? And so the people in Chodo were feeling left out of the economic development. They were angry about that. And Kim Dae-jung was going to be their salvation, they thought. And so that's why Gwangju was chosen.
One of the Peace Corps people who gave us a lecture a couple of years ago, he cycled in from Naju.
Right, Paul Cartwright, yeah.
And he was saying it was not only in Gwangju that there was resistance.
That's true, yeah.
And people all the time talking about what happened in Gwangju.
Right, yeah.
Because what happened in Gwangju didn't happen in the same way.
Yeah.
Can you say that?
Yeah, I mean, Mokpo was run by its citizens for a while, but there wasn't the kind of violence. The violence was in Gwangju. There were people left Gwangju, young men in buses, to spread the revolution, the uprising, to other areas. And Mokpo was one of those areas, but other areas as well. But again, you didn't see the violence. Another sad story I didn't put on the slides. When I was going to Gwangju, I saw near Naju, at an intersection, 3 passenger buses on the side of the road, empty of passengers and full of bullet holes and burn marks. Yeah. It took me 37 years to find out what happened. Turns out young men had left Gwangju on May 19th to spread the news into the rest of the province. When they heard that the military left town on the 21st, they tried to come back. They didn't know the military still surrounded the town. They were ambushed. I was told 7 died. It's amazing, with the 3 buses. But and nobody talks about that because it's outside Gwangju. Yeah, yeah. Again, Mokpo, I wish I'd gone to Mokpo first. I'd like to know what's going on there. But again, there wasn't the kind of violence in Mokpo or Changhong or any other places, Suncheon, none of those places that you see in Gwangju.
Thank you. Well, it's a very dark side of history.
Yeah.
How the incident happened? I happened to be out of country as a salesman, export salesman,
okay,
working with green on. Okay. 2 quick questions. My family brother was told about North Korean involvement. I hate to say that it's the most sensitive part of the topic, very delicate and controversial. Do you think that there is? I think that I happened to read a small article which was reported by an American CIA guy. At the time, they no involvement at all by North Korea.
Right.
At the time, the American military system, surveillance system, was very, very, strong enough.
Right.
Okay, forget about it.
Yeah.
So isn't there any kind of a full-scale intensive report? I mean, made by American agents or something like that. One question I really want to know.
Yeah.
2 questions, as Indian government,
yeah,
I'm not so sure what really happened. Did they pass a law to control the narrative?
Yeah.
Of a very hectic.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
The second question is easier. I believe in freedom of speech. I don't like it when I hear people saying they were North Koreans in Gwangju, but I don't want them going to jail for saying that. People have a right to be stupid. Okay. As for the first question, Tim Shorrock, as a guy named Tim Shorrock, he has a webpage, Shorrock. Is that how you spell his name? Yeah, he's a journalist who compiled a lot of U.S. documents through Freedom of Information Act, and their CIA documents, State Department documents, and so on. And you see really there, the American role in Gwangju it's nuanced. People in Gwangju still think the Americans were supporting Chun Doo-hwan. They didn't like what he was doing, but they're also afraid to withdraw support. They thought it might spread throughout the country and invite North Korean intervention. During these days, the American Navy sent a few ships from Okinawa to the peninsula, and people in Gwangju thought they were coming to help them. Now we know they were coming in case Chun needed help. But something people don't know, it came out in the Korean press about 3 years ago without all the details. On May 24th, let's go back, there was an air base outside of Gwangju that was shared by the ROK and the U.S. Air Force. On May 24th, the ROK was going to bomb Gwangju. Pilots were actually in their cockpits. And the Korean press 3 years ago said they were told not to do it. What the Koreans didn't say, what I learned in 1980, the Americans said, don't even think about it. So the Americans they could have done more, but they tried to mitigate the damage. Also on May 27th, when Chun wanted to recover the city, the Americans said, you can do that. We'll release troops from the Joint Command on one condition. It's regular troops, not paratroopers. And the Americans even flew some of the helicopters that brought the troops down. But Chun lied. There were paratroopers among the regular troops. Chun lied to the Americans. So the American role is not as bad as some people in Gwangju think. It could have been better. But again, they weren't thinking about democracy. They were thinking about security. They were really afraid that if what they called the riots, what the Americans called the riots in Gwangju spread, it would invite North Korean intervention. So they held their nose. I don't like that. I don't like that. I think freedom of speech. I think you have the right to be stupid. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, is it known how much Vatican knew about what was happening in Gwangju during the time?
During the time?
Yeah. Is it known how much Vatican knew about it?
How much?
She wanted to know.
Yeah, you can.
How much did the Vatican?
Oh, the Vatican.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. There were Korean priests in Rome. Yeah, studying in Rome. And they heard what happened, so they knew. I don't know if we went to the Pope or not. What really important, 1984, the Pope came to Korea.
The nuncio wanted to come to Gwangju, no?
He did go to Gwangju in 84. John Paul. Oh, France. Well, 84 was.
I think the nuncio tried to come down.
Oh, okay. Yeah, may have stopped. Yeah. I think so. But in 84, the Pope was able to go to Gwangju, and he wasn't able to say anything specifically about, but he said, I understand you've suffered, and I share your pain or something. And what do you know? The number of Catholic converts surged after that. I got a question way in the back. No, I didn't discuss that. No, I'm not a military historian. My understanding is that the first troops in Gwangju were not under the Joint Command. Yeah, they were. They again. Supposedly, the agreement was that regular forces would recover Gwangju on May 27, not paratroopers, because again, the regular forces weren't engaging in the kind of extremely violent activity that the paratroopers were. Special forces, yeah. Kongsubude, yeah. Well, it's translated both ways, paratroopers and special forces, yeah. That I don't think so. Yeah.
None of those
That's Chung Ho-young, right? Yeah.
The 7th, 11th, and the 3rd Brigades, but they were never under. They were under the special forces were under the control of Chung Ho-young.
Yeah.
Where the Americans and that the command actually, the top command of the troops, sort of released them to Chun Doo-hwan.
I think that was at the end because the agreement was America said, look, these special forces went too far. We know you have to recover, restore order in Gwangju, but do it with regular army. And Chun said, okay, I will. But he lied. I mean, there were regular army and special forces and the troops that came in on the morning of May 27th. But the Americans were told there wouldn't be. Of course he did. Yeah. Well, he did it regularly. When I was in Fulbright, when I was a Fulbright scholar then, 79 and 80, regularly Chun Doo-hwan released a statement saying the American government was supporting something another had done. And I would get a written statement delivered to my apartment from the U.S. Embassy saying it's not true. Yeah.
And they never once did.
Yeah, they kept doing it. Yeah.
But it's true that General Chun flew on sound to by helicopter.
I heard that rumor. I haven't been able to confirm it. I've heard that rumor. Yeah. Have it debunked? Okay.
The informant, he said he was an intelligence agent, but
yeah.
Yeah, he was not in a position for that.
Yeah. Chung Ho-young was there. Yeah, but not Chun Doo-hwan. Yeah. But nobody I talked to saw Chun Doo-hwan. But yeah. Hmm. Right. Yeah. Yes. That's right. Jae-gyu. I mean, Kim Jae-gyu, I mean, yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Right.
And it's rumored that in 1960, North Korea was in freedom because of April 19th. At the time, North Korea was doing some related stuff. He was not able to take advantage of the
Yeah.
And why did you use another country, from the participation controversial in sensitive issue? And I heard some North Korean military officers take this off the thing on the radio that he heard some of the North Korean leadership on the next North Korea and there will be some declarations of the game.
That's been debunked also. Yeah. Again, there were no North Koreans there. I can say one story, one of those rallies, a young woman, not young, under 40s, gave a very radical speech. People thought she sounded like she might be a North Korean agent. They arrested her and turned her over to the military. Turned out she was a native of Gwangju. Even the rebels were on the lookout for any possible North Korean incursions there. Yeah.
Question, please. Thank you. I was at the same event with Brother Anthony where Professor Myers last week said that studying Gwangju has become mythologized. Therefore, accurate history becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
As somebody doing this history, could you perhaps speak on what it is and whether there is a mythology around it that makes actual history impenetrable because of the sensitivity, the emotions, and so forth?
There is a mythology about it. Gwangju has been called the absolute community, as where everyone in Gwangju was united and agreed on how to respond to the troops. No, they weren't. There were these major splits. There were the people, again, who wanted to fight till the end, people who wanted to give up, run away, people who tried to avoid all the fighting and stay home. There were people who were frightened by the young men running around with guns. Because it wasn't students, by the way, who had guns. They were like shushan boys or people like that. Okay? And frightened people. So the Gwangju was not nearly as united as the myth would have it now. Like I said, that statue at the museum, young men with a fist raised high. But it's also been started from the other end, right? As though there was some kind of master plan to rise up and overthrow democracy. You know, people in Gwangju responded to brutal attacks on them. And again, they didn't start shooting back until May 21st. But you know, it's the most accurate movie rendition of this is the movie The Taxi Driver. The violence in it looks real. It looks like the videotapes that the German guy took, except at the end, the army wasn't chasing foreigners. But you know, it's every bit in history gets pathologized. I mean, and so it's just natural. And people in Gwangju want to think that everybody there was united in the same common battle, and they weren't. They weren't. I mean, look at the difference between the first settlement committee and the fact that some of those members wanted the army to come in and restore order. They were frightened of these young guys with guns. So the city was split. You know, it's to get to the history of it, I'm trying to read these oral histories, but they were compiled 10 or 20 years after the event. And so I have to remember that people's memories change. And so what I try to do is compare different accounts of the same event. If they say the same thing, it must have really happened, right? But it's difficult. I mean, I've had to check my own memories. I wasn't sure I'd really seen those 3 buses I talked about near Naju until I finally got it confirmed about 6 years ago. I thought maybe it was a false memory. I didn't bring a camera to Gwangju deliberately. I didn't want to be conspicuous. I didn't bring a notebook. I didn't want the army to notice me, right? So I said, did I really see that or not? And I did. I had to ask an American friend who was with me when I was almost bayoneted. Was I almost bayoneted? She goes, yes, you were. I didn't imagine that. So it's tricky. I mean, I'm used to dealing with Joseon Dynasty stuff, which is really old, right? I can't talk to any eyewitnesses. So all we can do in history is approximate the past, you know, get as close as we can to an accurate account of what happened and why. We're never going to have a completely accurate account. History is never definitive.
Okay.